Welcome to Green Building Matters, the original and most popular podcast focused on the green building movement. Your host is Charlie Cicchetti, one of the most credentialed experts in the green building industry and one of the few to be honored as a lead fellow. Each week, Charlie welcomes a green building professional from around the globe to share their war stories, career advice, and unique insight into how sustainability is shaping the built environment. So settle in, grab a fresh cup of coffee, and get ready to find out why green building matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. I'm your host, Charlie Cicchetti. I've got Chris Pyke with us this week. Chris and I have seen each other, we joke, in different locations than really where we both home base. Chris is outside of Washington, D.C. area. I'm in Atlanta, and we even ran into each other a few months ago in all places out in Munich, Germany, at kind of their Green Build Europe, if you will. And I just have been wanting to, talk to Chris and hear about his story, and that's why I invited him on. So, Chris, how you doing today?
I'm doing great, Charlie. I appreciate the chance to be here.
Oh, 100%. And I've just seen you in so many different ways. And I know we'll talk about your time with the USGBC and getting us all the way to where today you're Senior VP of Product at ArcSkoru. So I can't wait to hear more about that journey. And so tell us the origin story, though. Where'd you grow up and where'd you go to school?
Yeah, awesome. I appreciate the chance. I mean, I grew up in Arlington, Virginia. So I actually not that far from where I live now. But I had no expectation of being here when I was in my late 40s. I basically grew up in Arlington in the DC area. And then I quickly went to, I was one of those kids that got to be 18, piled everything in the car, drove down to Waynesburg, Virginia, went to William & Mary, and had the opportunity to spend what amounted to 5 years there. And after that time, I basically kept going west. I'm into mountains and running and rock climbing and that kind of stuff. And so over the intervening 10 years after that, just kept moving to Boulder, ultimately to Santa Barbara before having family stuff that brought us home. And so that's the big picture story.
All the way west and then came back. And I love that, man. And I know you even did some post-grad work, right? Maybe while you're out there and UC Santa Barbara. So kind of connect those dots, if you don't mind, your undergrad, this journey what kind of work were you doing? And then maybe even going back to school. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. It's a weird story. I'll bring you back to the beginning. I mean, so it's like one of those things on TikTok where they're like, you see someone up to their waist in mud and you're like, How did it get that way? So when I left the DC area, I had this opportunity to go work as a research assistant at a place called the Virginia Institute of Marine Science. And before long, I literally found myself in the dark, up to my waist in mud, emptying nets and weighing fish and measuring crabs. And I got really lucky in that experience at this place called VIMS, where the work was literally at the intersection between the built environment, land use, and natural habitats, like wetlands. We were in wetlands. So we were climbing through backyards before emerging into like lush grass and all that kind of stuff. And the bottom line is that really got me into environmental science, right at this literal intersection between the stuff going on in the land, like development, like shopping centers and homes and that stuff, and what was going on in the bay. And then we were out there paddling and fishing and all that kind of stuff. And so I had that experience, and I made these friendships and relationships that I carried with me from that point forward. And so really got into that way of thinking about the problem. And I feel like I went from biology to ecology. I ended up like studying the forest in Panama, and I ended up back in California ultimately. But one way or another, I've always been interested in that fundamental intersection between land use, the built environment, and natural systems. And so my whole tour around has been that. And ultimately that ended up being in California, studying geography of all things. And honest to God, the real story is that before I got to grad school, geography, I didn't even know what the hell geography was. Literally, and this is just between you, me, and everybody listening, I was studying geology because I liked hydrology. And it turned out when I looked in the course catalog, geology is next to geography. And I started looking at their courses and I'm like, whoa, those are a lot more interesting. And so anyway, got into GIS, remote sensing. And as is indicative, my very first day of grad school, I show up at UC Santa Barbara. My advisor walks in on me and he literally hands me a stack of reel-to-reel tapes, like the old magnetic kind. And he basically plops them in my hands and he says, hey, tell me how much carbon is in the forest. And I was like, great. So anyway, a lot of windy stories there, but the bottom line is all of those things are held together with this idea of the intersection between the kind of built environment and natural systems, one way or the other. And that's been the kind of common thread through all that.
Well, and then that's what I like to follow up with. Yeah, how'd you get that sustainability kind of itch? And you just told us. And so buildings, though, okay, so connect the dots now. So maybe something brought you back east, and the building movement, maybe CTG or the
EPA. I'll tell you. So I'll give you two vignettes about that. One is, so I ended up doing when I was at UC Santa Barbara, I ended up doing my dissertation on climate change and land use in the Central Valley of California. So literally the intersection between urban sprawl and climate change and land use and endangered critters. So I got really interested. But what really interested me was what was driving urban land use? Why did it grow the way it did? How did it work? And so for me, that related to this passion for what I thought of as going down in scale. I wanted to know why cities grew the way they do. And I wanted to work on something that could make a difference in making them grow in a better way versus a worse way. And so I went off to the US EPA. My wife got a postdoc and I had a fellowship from the Nature Conservancy. We went back to DC and I had after a couple of years, I ended up in a perfectly great career science job at the US EPA. I studied air and water and their impact on land use and ecosystems. But I wanted to do something at a finer scale. And so my friend Heather Rosenberg, who is a longtime champion of the green building industry, she works at Arup today. Malcolm Lewis at CTG Energetics recruited Heather into his then 30-person engineering firm in Irvine, California. And in turn, Heather and Malcolm pulled me out of a totally perfectly comfortable government research job to do fly-by-night green building consulting. And I mean, there's no logic behind that. And this was like 2006 or something like that. And I remember right about that time, like as an indicative of that moment for some of the folks who have been in our industry a long time, Malcolm was a father figure. He was the embodiment of a sort of practice-centered firm. And a lot of people in our industry have had a moment with him. And I remember riding an elevator with Malcolm and Bill Browning up to the old Mass Ave USGBC office, and the doors literally opened, and there were all these cool people in there. And I was like, whoa, this is for me. And so anyway, bottom line is Malcolm made a huge difference. Heather made a huge difference in changing the direction of my career. And, things probably never been the same.
Wow. I love it, man. Those are some really good early influences that have done a lot for the green building movement. And thanks for connecting how you got into green buildings, literally there, CTG, and then some time at the U.S. Green Building Council. But I do want to ask more mentors. You just named a couple. They had some influence. Anyone else, maybe Chris, opened a door for you or you looked up to along the way?
Yeah, that's a great question. I feel like there is a family of folks who kind of, my foundational family in the green building community are folks related to the CTG community, right? And we've all gone on to have this alumni program. And I like each place that I've had the privilege of working has kind of created this playing it forward. I really value my EPA colleagues and they continue to open doors, but maybe I'll take your question all the way back. My very first boss, mentor, things at that old Virginia Institute of Marine Science, I got to say, we remained friends. One guy in particular, his name's Kirk. He was my first boss, and he opened doors to both personal and professional opportunities that lasted for decades.
Wow.
And I just value that taking, at that time, I was probably an 18 or 19-year-old kid, and providing a positive set of experiences with what we would now call sustainability, environmental stuff, and kind of providing a runway over time. I've really had that in the back of my head as I've had the privilege of working with students and interns and associates over time of like, how do we give that launching pad in that sustained engagement? There's so many things I could call out, but that one seems the most foundational and really taking someone under your wing. And anyway, a lot to say about that, but I got to say that those things matter.
They really do. And I love how you weaved in the personal introductions, the professional, you look back and there's probably just a handful for all of us in our careers that, man, I really needed that at the time, whether it was encouragement or a door opened or a little nudge or come on, what are you thinking here? So now let's talk a little more of that career timeline. So tell us about your early time at the U.S. Green Building Council and how that's gotten you into some other things, and just how was it back then at the, I guess, what was that, 2009, 2010 at the U.S. Green Building Council? What was going on then?
It was a good time. I mean, I got into it. So when I was with CTG, I spent about 2 years consulting, as many people do, to the council for various things. And so that got me in with Brendan Owens and Jason Hartke and Carol Kaiser and Rebecca Flora and these folks who were around in that 2007, 2008 time scale. And it was kind of salad days. It was exciting. It was go-go. We were doing dozens and dozens of lead workshops. And so I got in the early days of consulting for Brendan, particularly Owens, in the early days of Lead 2009. So I was part of the consulting team that basically did the analytic basis for 2009. That included the Tracy impact categories, the credit weightings. We did spreadsheets. We did all sorts of really fun stuff. And I thought, this is really cool. And at the same time, as everyone knows, the other part of our business, like at CTG, which was consulting to like master plan developers in 2007, whoa, that was not so fun. And I was on a freaking plane to the West Coast, really intimately involved in CEQA and all that kind of stuff. So basically, Scott Horst and Rebecca Flora came to me and they said, would you like to take over the then research program for the USGBC? And it all candor, what they said was, it has a budget of $1.5 million a year. And the only thing we ask you to do is stop doing what we're currently doing. And then you don't have to commute to Irvine, California, and you can run this program. I was like, sold. And so I came into this fun time and took over that program. And over and we did a bunch. So I met a lot of the fun people in our industry, whether it's the Center for the Built Environment, our colleagues at Oregon or Colorado or CMU and Vivian Loftus and all these awesome people who were in the research side of the green building community. And as that went along, we had this idea for GBIG, this Green Building Information Gateway. And GBIG became the thing that kind of ate the research program. And so we spent years basically developing this idea of GBIG. And so some folks know what that is. It still exists at gbig.org. But then, about that time, I started having a great collaboration with Nils Koch, who was the founder of GRESB, and he was looking to spin GRESB out of Maastricht University. So Nils and I had kind of hatched this plan to meet his needs and to kind of to connect USGBC and GBCI to the growing world of ESG. So we basically orchestrated this idea to buy GRESB out. And so that was the next big chapter for me, was going on to be chief operating officer of GRESB and to try to merge together the ideas of GBIG and GRESB. Spent the next bunch of years doing that. And I'd love to talk about that. It was super fun. And it was literally, it was from the earliest days of GRESB when we first bought GRESB. It was a literal 2-bedroom apartment in a residential apartment building. And we were literally working out of the kitchen and the dining room. And since then it's gone on to be what it is. And I stepped away from that because I had a startup itch. I went and joined a company called Aclima to focus on air quality sensing. And that was super fun. I learned a lot and talked about mentors and other ideas about where IoT and prop tech and those kind of things came from. And then I came back to run ARC. And it basically said, hey, I think ARC's going to be foundational to what happens next for the green building movement. And that's kind of the big picture. So big picture, research program, GBIG, GRESB, and now Aclima, and then ARC. That's big picture.
That's quite the resume there, Chris. A lot of those tools, my companies use every single day. So I appreciate everything you had a hand in, and hopefully you look back and you're like kind of proud of some of that. So that's kind of my next question is, when you do look back, what are some accomplishments that stand out? Professional, sure, but also anything personal you've accomplished. What are a few things on the highlight reel?
Yeah, well, I guess as we all have to do. I mean, man, I got a 13-year-old and an almost 17-year-old. That's an accomplishment. That's the number one at the top of the deck, right? So they're happy, well-adjusted. God bless. That's. So, professionally, the things I was reflecting on your question, and I love what we did with GRESB. There's a certain purity to what we did with GRESB, particularly in that time when it was going from a academic startup to a real company. And so some of the things that I had the most direct involvement with, basically we needed someone to build the infrastructure assessment, which is now about a third to about a third of GRESB today. And so I basically sat down with a white sheet of paper and some ideas from a working group and wrote that thing out. And I feel really good about that, about where that went. And we did something very similar with both the health and the resilience modules in GRESB. And those tools, it's so tangible and so quick. Like I will tell you, look, when we wrote the first, when I sat down with Kelly Warden and wrote the first draft of the health module for GRESB, we went from blank sheet of paper to thing in the field being used by 150 companies in 90 days. And wow. that kind of impact is something that I just love. We did something very similar. We repeated it, in this case with Heather Rosenberg, with the resilience module. Again, from blank sheet of paper to thing in the field in 90 days. And now hundreds and hundreds of companies have used those, and those ideas are reflected in the mainline GRESB assessments. So I feel like I hope that we made a small contribution toward elevating the issues of health, elevating the issues of climate risk and resilience in the way that property companies and funds work. And at a minimum, they were fun to do because ideas to impact were pretty damn quick.
Well, and you did that. And for those listeners that maybe aren't quite as familiar with GRESB, right, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, and it's not just how green is your portfolio and your real estate fund, but the things that you've had an influence on. And that health module was before the pandemic. And now look at it. It's there. It's scored. It's a part of what we do and talk about. And then resiliency right behind it. So that's cool. That's on your highlight reel, man, because I know it affects a lot of my portfolio real estate clients. So it was nice to see that you move quickly on that. Anything else? You've worked on a lot of different projects too, but whenever I ask someone that's maybe done consulting, it's hard to pick just one. But is there just a fun project that you really enjoyed working on over the years?
I gotta say, I know it's reflects my idiosyncratic career path, but I really enjoyed working on the early days of LEAD 2009 as a consulting project for CTG. It was really a white sheet of paper. It was sitting down with cool people like Brendan, and we had folks at Harvard, and we had these really interesting tag moments at that point in time, and we really thought about re-envisioning how LEAD works. I don't know that we learned a lot of lessons, good and bad, in that process. But the idea of conceptualizing a quantitatively based, impact-driven rating system with a fairly white sheet of paper and working through BD&C, IDC, O&M, ND, and the whole thing was really fun. I mean, that's fun. I also call out, in the early days of GBIG, we had a huge amount of fun. We worked with our partners at Green River, Michael Knapp, Aaron Michael. They are the Brattleboro Mafia. And we really created a fun platform, and we experimented with these ideas about how did you make the market more transparent. Again, we learned lessons pro and con. That was a huge respect for that Brattleboro Mafia of allies in our community. Anyway, I guess I'd be remiss. One more that let's call out. We also did a lot with this on the green health thing. So we did something called the Green Health Partnership, and we really thought hard about how to embed health in green building. And my colleague, Matt Trowbridge, then at the University of Virginia, now at IWBI, we had a 5-year plus adventure in thinking about green building and health. So the bottom line is, whether it's GBIG and the Brattleboro gang, or whether it's the Charlottesville gang working on Green Health Partnership, these have been pretty fun times on some of these projects. We always want more, but they're fun times.
Absolutely. And I like GBIG, gbig.org. To our listeners, we'll put a link, and I love it, man. All right, so let's go present day. Tell us a little bit more about ARC, your role there, and what's keeping you busy.
Yeah. So, I came into ARC as to be honest, I came into ARC about 2.5 years ago, and I told Mahesh I would take this on if we understood that it was a bit of a turnaround project. And so I said, hey, I believe, let's see if we have some shared beliefs. We believe that measured real world performance is the future of the green building industry. Check. We believe that we haven't worked that out yet in terms of how we are delivering and embedding that solution. We said, check. So I'm like, okay, I've got it. So I teamed up with Dave Whittick, who is my partner in crime as our chief operating officer. And what we did was really re-envision ARC as a business model. And so the most important thing we did was make it a freemium model. So we said, we believe that every project everywhere should be able to measure, track, and score performance, period. That is a mission mandate from a USGBC perspective. And we did. That took about a year to get a true freemium system. And then we said, we want to support ourselves by providing value-added stuff for projects and portfolios. So we did. And we wanted to have a new model for partnership so that we could say, we want to work with all sorts of organizations who are aligned on this journey. And we have. And now we've got about 24 of these organizations. So my passion in this is, the reason I'm into ARC is that I want to shift our engagement to what I think of as scale. I want to use performance to engage entire organizations, entire portfolios, literally all buildings in, and make sure that we have a solution for every building. I'm sure like you probably, I know a lot of people feel like I do. What I hate about the green building movement is I drive down the freeway and I pass a zillion buildings that I have nothing to offer to on my way toward a beautiful trophy LEED Platinum building. I want to have something to offer to every building to make it better. And that's what I think we're trying to do with ARC. The thing that is also motivating us in parallel is I think that greenwashing is the issue of our moment, where we have all these audacious claims. Okay, the next part of those claims is we're going to have to walk those claims into reality. And this is where the green building movement should just stand up and go, yeah, this is our thing. We are the embrace accountability people. And so the two things we want to do is make it accessible to everybody and provide an overarching performance-based outcome sort of thing. And so those things get me going at the end of the day. And there's a lot of other things: ESG, finance, decarbonization, electrification, yada, yada, yada. All the things all of us work on every day. But it's those big things: engagement at scale, and using performance to fight greenwashing that get me out of bed in the morning.
I love it. And for those that maybe aren't having their buildings in ARC yet, I believe, right, you can score the energy and water for free, right? Just get in and just got to put your buildings in and, just get compared to that data set really globally. And I know you have thousands and thousands of buildings in there, and sounds like getting the power users to put lots of their portfolio in. But just tell all of our listeners, if you have a building and you want to get it scored, let's get in there. We'll put that one.
Energy, water, waste, transportation, human experience. And just for folks who might have not seen this in a while, we also have a growing list of building performance standards, not just the ARC benchmark, but whether you're looking at Local Law 97, CREM, Climate Bond, something else. Where do you stand against those things today, and where are you going to stand in the future? Again, like you said, it's totally free. Check it out. And if you're a consultant and you're working in that space, what I love most is we have consultants who are now bringing hundreds or thousands of their clients' projects in without us helping them at all. It's a service they're providing to others. God bless. I love that part. If I wake up and I see 1,000 new projects that someone put in that I have no idea, that I have to go look up the company, that's a good day.
I love it. Oh man. There's some other things you do too, though. It says, right, lecturer there at Georgetown. I know you're some other committees. So besides the normal professional work, what else are you doing? What subjects do you like to teach?
Yeah, the other big stuff for me is I do teach. I've taught urban planning for a long time. So I'm a geographer who has kind of scaled down and found my niche teaching urban planning. I taught at George Washington University for a number of years. And the last 5+ years, I've been at Georgetown School of Continuing Studies, teaching urban and regional planning. I got lots of friends there, whether it's like Whitney Austin Gray, she teaches along the same program. We've had other, and it's run by the well-known Uwe Brandeis, who used to be with ULI. So it is a great little program. And now we're up to about 80 students kind of cycling in there. So I teach sustainability, and I teach that now twice a year, plus an urban innovation class, which I'm teaching right now. And I really do I appreciate the really diverse, interesting set of students we get. And they keep me motivated. It's a great engagement. So it is definitely a side hustle. It is my once a week thing, but it's a thing that keeps me reading new stuff, interacting with new people, and moving down the field. So I value it as a little bit of it's my 10% verge, 25% of side hustle.
Great side hustle there to give back and teach and inspire. I love it, man. All right. So this is one of my favorite questions to ask a green building guru like you is, hey, what's next? What should we be reading up on now in this green building movement?
In terms of reading up on, I'll go right there. the two things tie together really well. I teach this summer innovation class, and it's been a lot of things over the years, but right now we're reading what I think of as the classic literature on innovation and scale. And to me, there's the three most foundational things to read. And man, I've read them many times, but I get more out of them each time. Everett Rogers' Diffusion of Innovation, Jeff Moore's Crossing the Chasm, and Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma. And I read them as a set, and I think about our moment. And each one of them has something to offer as we think about how to bring our movement to scale. And if I had to call one out, I think that Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma says a ton about where the green building movement is right now. And I realize we're talking about books that are 20 years old, but if you look through the kind of outdated examples and go to the core ideas, it's spot on. And so if people want to think about, I would love to have more people in our industry having those thoughts and thinking about how to overcome those challenges.
Man, that's great. Well, you already gave us 3 great book recommendations. We'll link to all of those. And I don't know if I'm sure you do, but the BlackRock CEO there and Larry Fink, his letter every year, and really doubling down on climate and how it associates with finance and financial risk. And his last letter in January said the next 1,000 unicorns will be related to decarbonization. So that's cool. And I think it's kind of what you're saying is we need more innovation here around all things sustainability, and you can build quite the business around it too. So
that's exactly right. Man, you're totally right. And I'll there's a lot to say about where ESG is and where the Larry letters and all that kind of stuff. But the bottom line about the fact that we need that innovation and we need to go from a self-referential conversation around the top of the market toward an all-in is the heart of the matter. Like if we're going to build those unicorns, we're not going to do it in the top 1, 5, 10% of the market. We're going to do it by engaging a lot bigger slice than we have to date. And that's where those conversations come home to roost.
Cool, man. All right, let's get a further peek into you and what helps you, Chris, day to day. Do you have any good habits, routines, rituals?
I was reflecting on this one. I grew up as a competitive runner, and I still run. And I got to say that when I can run running essentially every day or something like that, it clears my head. It focuses my mind. I practice my presentations. I develop my arguments. I write some letters. I do stuff when I'm out there. And actually, it works so well that I often have to tone it down. I come back in the door and sometimes I'll pound out something and I'll go, I got to just let that wear off just a little bit and double check that because it definitely fires up. Sometimes that's a bit overwhelming, but that's my number one go-to is if I need to process something. And sometimes if it's a really hard problem, there's a bunch of runs in it.
Do you have certain routes you like to take or just distance or time? Just give it.
I'm generally a time person at this point in my life, but I do like exploring different cities. So when I travel, one of my favorite things is to go run. So I like when we were both together in Munich, I had great runs up through these parks in Munich. And basically the defining thing, I'll admit, I judge most places I travel by how good or bad the running is. I love it. So I was just in Minnesota, and I got to say, I thought that for Green Sports Alliance, and I was really pleasantly surprised that it was really awesome running in downtown Minnesota.
That's a great time of year to be in the Twin Cities too. Man, thank you for giving us that peek and what really kind of grounds you there. What's your specialty or gift?
I'd like to. We all want our gift to be like, I'm like Usain Bolt or LeBron James. Unfortunately, I don't have either one of those. So I think that what I make do with is a degree of enthusiasm, passion for mission, and a work ethic. And I hope that my gift is being flexible, adaptable. I also think I'm pretty numerate. I like in that I like to think about the way the world works in numbers. But the bottom line is, I think what people come to me for is that I have an enthusiasm and passion for the fundamentals of what we do. And that seems to be the tie that binds it together. I hope I've got some other characteristics, but that seems to be the one that keeps cropping up.
You've given us a peek into the geology and then the geography, but it's almost like you should have been kind of more of an engineer, but you went this way because, I'd say you're kind of a Renaissance man here, well-rounded with all things sustainability and ecology.
I think about that all the time. I think one of my things, one of the reasons I've been successful at USG to the degree that I have at USGBC is that I came at it as a scientist. And I got to say, I do identify with that. Like that basically I'm trying to ask questions and test them with data. I think if I had come into USGBC as an architect, as an engineer, as a planner, I would have been locked into a tribe. And I think because I wasn't from any of our food groups, I didn't have a natural affinity to one of our tribes. And actually, I didn't even know the baggage. I hadn't been through architecture school. I didn't know what that was about. I wasn't a facility manager. So in some ways, my own ignorance and kind of weird angle on the problem gave me a degree of agnosticism that I think still matters. Because I'm not any of our normal food groups. And I'm both humble in that I don't squat about designing a building. But I've got great respect for those who do. But I also understand that what we're trying to do is a little different. So anyway, bottom line is that breadth and that lack of alignment with our traditional food groups has been something I've gone back to time and time again.
Man, what great self-awareness. I second that now that you've connected it 100%. A lot of the products we use might have been totally different if you didn't come in with that scientific thinking first and what is possible. So I'm inspired by that. For anyone listening, though, if you're at a conference and Chris is one of the speakers, you have to hear him speak because you're one of the best speakers I've ever heard in our green building circuit. And I really mean that. And a lot of it is, you can back it up with real data you can digest, but over here, just your enthusiasm, like you can't fake passion. So anyway, I always enjoy hearing you speak at any of our conferences. So Chris, appreciate all of that. All right. So just a couple more personal questions here. Bucket list. I'm a fan of the bucket list. Are there one or two things maybe you could share on your bucket list?
I'll give you two, one personal and one professional. I mean, on the personal side, my wife and I our bucket list is I would love to do 50 skiing days when I'm 50. So I got a couple years left before that, but I would love to get 50 ski days in on when I'm 50. So that's my personal bucket list. And professionally, and that's, you can also tell I like that. I do like that. And if COVID and monkeypox willing, 50 and 50. So the other part is, man, I've never scratched my G-big itch, and not that monkeypox and G-big itch, I'm not sure they go together, but we've got. I have never scratched that. And I think that our industry needs a thing like G-big that makes it easier to find the people and organizations that contribute to high performance outcomes. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I thought we needed. We never got a chance to play it through. So I continue. It's on my mind today because I put a proposal in for a grant last week to try to. I'm still pushing. And I'm not done pushing because I still think it's the right idea. And so my bucket list, I got a lot more things on my bucket list, but 50 and 50 and a real good whack at GBIG.
That's great, man. I love it. Oh, thank you for sharing. You shared a few awesome books around innovation and even technology with us. Is there another book, doesn't even have to be about the built environment, you'd recommend to our listeners?
Yeah, there's so many, man. I do find myself reading a lot. I've gotten back into maybe it's kind of we talked about Everett Rogers, we talked about Jeff Moore, talked about Clay Christensen. The more contemporary version is a bit of the Malcolm Gladwell tipping point and some of those things. Obviously, it's in a theme. I got to say that if I can skip halfway through like tipping point and just sort of embrace the conclusions about how ideas move through social systems, I get excited about that. And so if folks, and when I think about our social system as a green building industry and what does it take to get ideas through it and how does change happen and what are our roles, I can get really excited about that. So if people maybe you glanced at that before, or if you have time to listen to Malcolm Gladwell's TED Talks or some of those things, that I would recommend that to folks because I think it helps me to understand the moment that we're in right now. And of course, if you haven't read it, the dang IEA 2050 decarbonization roadmap, you should read that too, because that pretty much says where we're going.
Great resources, and I'll put those links in the podcast show notes. Those are awesome. Two more questions here. One is there anything you wish you'd have known earlier in your career? Any advice you wish you'd have known a little earlier?
That's a good question, man. I wish, I'll say, I've done some time with startups, and I wish I had done a really ambitious startup in my mid-20s. And I went to try to do a really ambitious startup in my early 40s. And when I had kids and mortgages and all that kind of stuff. So if anybody out there is thinking, hey, I'm 25 and I want to take that, go do that ambitious startup. Go do that crazy thing with an 18-month runway and don't do it. Just do it. Just make that. I mean, more broadly, I as someone who's now giving advice to a 17-year-old about college, I don't know. There's the other piece I would say is there's always more options than you think there are. And so playing the field as broadly as you possibly can. I never in a zillion years, there was a time, when I was working for CTG, I found myself at one point, we were doing commissioning, and I found myself in the boiler room of a museum in Arlington. And I spent 8 freaking hours wondering whether a valve should be this way or that way. That's a path. And I figured out that path wasn't for me, but I know that in a real certainty now. And so anyway, I would just say there's more options than you think there are, and go do that startup when you're in your freaking 20s. Just do that.
Great nuggets, man. All right, last question. So let's say someone listening to this podcast is getting inspired by your story and they're just now jumping into the green building movement. See, some of our listeners might be elite fellows. They might be doing it as long as you have and I have. But there's a lot that are just now maybe making a career move or maybe getting out of school early in their career and they're jumping into this green building movement. Any words of encouragement for them, Chris, as we come to a close?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do. I think this is, I know we say this a lot, but this is the most pivotal moment. This is a change point, right? We've been at this 25 years and we can be super proud. I think we should be incredibly proud of what we've accomplished because we have in our own industry changed the world. And I every so often I dip my head out into other industries that are not real estate, that are not infrastructure, that don't. And I like our people, man. I like what we are a good tribe of people. At the same time, we are a tribe of people who are trying to figure out how to have impact across entire organizations, across entire portfolios. We want to go from singles to dozens to hundreds to thousands, and we need to. And so this moment of figuring that out, we will figure that out. One way or another, we're going to figure that out, how to have that impact at a greater scale. And I want our industry that's my point of enthusiasm, is that we will figure that out. And so to kind of wrap that together, this is a proud group of good people that people should be psyched to join because it is distinctively good. And it's good in mission, it's directionally correct, and it's timely. If we can embrace that we are those people who are going to fight greenwashing and go to scale, this is an awesome corner of the universe to invest your time into. Now, can we live that aspiration? Can I get 80%? I don't know. But so when I think about what I hope motivates people who are thinking about why to devote their time to this corner of the sustainability challenge, those are things that motivate me.
I love it, man. Good by nature. Hey, everybody, take Chris's LinkedIn here. Shoot him a message. Let him know what you thought of this. I got inspired today on our conversation, and I know you a little bit, but now I feel like I really got to know this really cool background. And I think I would agree now, just the scientific approach to all the things you've done at the USGBC and LEAD and GRESB and GBIG and now at ARC. Man, thanks for everything you've done for the green building movement, Chris. I appreciate it.
Likewise, Charlie. I mean, I appreciate you making these stories available. I really enjoy listening in each week.
I just want to say thank you to our loyal listeners. We actually are celebrating over 1 year here on the Green Building Matters podcast. Me and the entire team were stoked and just so glad you continue to listen every Wednesday morning to a new interview with a green building professional here in this industry, or just some pro tips that we want to make sure that you are getting straight from us, straight to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Green Building Matters podcast. At gbes.com, our mission is to advance the green building movement through best-in-class education and encouragement. Remember, you can go to gbes.com/podcast for any notes and links that we mentioned in today's episode. And you can actually see the other episodes that have already been recorded with our amazing guests. Please tell your friends about this podcast. Tell your colleagues. And if you really enjoyed it, leave a positive review on iTunes. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on next week's episode.